So the story of SpaceX is really a story of Elon Musk. It's about sort of his vision and how he sort of came to create this company. And it is something that he created with the direction in mind of getting to Mars. So I'm going to cover that briefly, and then I'll sort of talk about the SpaceX journey and maybe some of their milestones. So first up, before we go into Elon Musk and SpaceX, the question isn't should we go to Mars. The question is when should we go to Mars, or should we stay on Earth until the next extinction level event? As you can see here, in the known history of our planet, there have been at least 5 major extinction periods in the past 540 million years. And we're currently in the Holocene extinction period, which is measured by the fact that extinctions have been occurring at over 1,000 times the background extinction rate since 1900 as a result of human activity. So that's a whole other story, which would be a great topic for a presentation if anyone wants to put their hand up. But I think you'll see the idea that if we stay only on Earth, at some point humans will go extinct, whether that's from war, climate change, asteroids, or disease, or just the decline of our biosphere. Basically, we need to back up our hard drive, that is humanity, if we want to avoid losing that data forever. The other aspect, aside from extinction, is that we're currently enjoying a very unique time period in our civilization. We have reached the apex of the fossil fuel era, and we've had a powered manufacturing boom, and fossil fuel is about to run out. So we're about to suffer the full effects of climate change after having used up all the fuel, and we could very well slide back a few hundred years in technology. Civilization's filled with the decline of powerful civilizations, and there's no way to know whether we'll ever be at the point again in our time where we'll be able to launch rockets. One example is concrete. What we now call concrete was invented in the 1700s by the British, I think, but Romans, Greeks, and others were using concrete for centuries, from 150 BC. At the present time, there is no way of knowing the exact ratio of the Roman concrete. What we do know is it lasted for thousands of years, that it contained volcanic ash, but we don't know exactly how to make it. And that's crazy that here we are, 2,020 years later, able to talk to anyone on the globe, but we can't make Roman concrete. Another example is scurvy, a vitamin C deficiency disease. We know from history that citrus was a known cure from 1497. It was published and documented, very well known. It was recommended by basically the CEO of the East India Trading Company as the cure for scurvy. Yet for hundreds of years, this cure was repeatedly lost, forgotten, discovered, discredited, and confused, killing millions of sailors. Despite multiple books and studies, the scurvy continued to kill until 1932, when the cure was discovered by some fluke chance. It was a really interesting talk that I read. And it seems like we live in a time where technology and progress will never stop, but we have history to sort of reflect upon how easy it is for us to backslide. And our current age has only been going for the last 100 years. I share these examples because they are a clear example that human civilizations can wane, that you can go from a civilization spanning 1,500 years and 21% of the world population, in the case of the Romans, to something where only the ruins remain today, with their technology lost and their achievements sundered. Who is to say whether our industrial global capitalist society will survive the effects of peak oil, climate change, or famine that could come upon us now? Alright, now we're getting to the meat of the heart of everything. Elon Musk, co-founder of PayPal and Tesla, was always fascinated with space. As a kid, he fantasized about space and used to bring homemade rockets to school to light during recess. In 2002, fresh from the successful sale of PayPal and with some time on his hands, Elon wondered when NASA was going to get around to visiting Mars. He looked on the website and was really surprised to see that there was no date, there was no planned mission, there was no anything in relation to Mars. It had fallen off the agenda. Mars exploration had been a goal of the National Space Program, and preliminary planning had been undertaken since the 1950s, but since the 1980s, it has sort of become one of those hot potato topics that no one really wanted to touch or get into, and it was politically considered a bit of a bomb, because if you talked about going to Mars, people would vote you out. On seeing the lack of a planned mission to Mars, Musk developed a crazy idea to send a small greenhouse to the red planet. The idea was that humans are excited by and driven by superlative achievements. To have the first life on other planets would hopefully reignite humanity's interest in space. So Musk did what anyone would do and travelled to Russia to buy a decommissioned ICBM And yeah, this is basically the start of the SpaceX journey. So for a brand new launch vehicle, it would have cost $65 million for Musk to have sent his greenhouse to Mars. And he figured he needed 2 missions because you sort of usually have to assume that something's going to go wrong in space. So the ICBMs were all his budget would allow for, and he has sort of had preliminary talks that he was going to be able to get them from the Russians for $20 million, and he was angling for $20 million for 2. But once he got there, the Russians basically hardballed him and said it was going to be $20 million each. $20 million each. They pointed out that while their rockets were made in the 1960s, they were a diminishing resource as there weren't being any more made. Flying back from Russia empty-handed, Musk realized that his initial premise was flawed. It wasn't just that we didn't have the will to Mars, it was that we didn't have the cheaper technology to get there. It was just too damned expensive to go there. Over the course of the initial project, Elon talked to various space industry people, and with this network realized that it might just be simpler and cheaper to build them himself. Rocket technology had not fundamentally changed since the 1960s, and if you look at other technology from the 1960s, that's gotten cheaper, yet rockets have stayed the same. We're spending more money per launch than ever before, and America no longer have its own launch capacity prior to SpaceX. So still on the flight back from Russia, Elon Musk busied himself with a spreadsheet and a laptop, and then after a while said, hey guys, I think we can build this rocket ourselves. So this is the story of SpaceX, space exploration, and how it came to be. One man's vision and determination to do it himself and revolutionize an entire industry. How hard can it be? It's not rocket science. So Elon Musk follows a religion of first principles. And first principles is basically a physics first type of approach to problem. And it follows this. Reduce your problem down to the fundamentals and the physical constraints, and then work your way out from there. Somebody could say that rockets are really expensive, and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've always been in the past. Well, that's pretty dumb, because if you applied that reasoning to anything new, then you would never be able to get a new thing. You can't say, oh, horses. Nobody wants a car, because horses are great, and we're used to them, and people are never going to get them. People are never going to get cars. People actually used to say this. So rockets, people say it's never going to cost less than $60 million per launch, and it's not ever going to get cheaper. So first principles means, okay, you say, why is spaceflight so expensive? What are the core minerals and componentry that goes into a rocket? Can we make those for cheaper than they're currently being sold for? What is the cheapest price that I can get each of those things, and can I build a rocket with them for less than the price that everyone else is charging? And you can see on this chart here, I've just done a bit of an example of the sort of componentry cost. So this here, 2% of the direct costs is the propellant, and then this 97% of this cost here is the vehicle structure, and then everything else is separate services. After SpaceX's first principle study of rockets, it turned out the material cost is only 2% of the launch cost. There's a bunch of reasons for this, but the main reason is that the old way of spaceflight was incredibly risk adverse, and mainly using flight-proven hardware, most of which designed in the 1960s. One of SpaceX's competitors is using rockets made from the 1960s. Not designed, but literally made in the 1960s and stored in Siberia somewhere until they got around to using them. The other problem with aerospace companies is that they outsource everything. You have layers upon layers of subcontractors. You have to go 5 layers to deep to find anyone that actually does something useful, like milling steel or welding components together. Every level above that tacks on profit and inefficient middle managers. Even NASA suffers from this problem within its own structure. NASA centers are spread across the entire United States, each one requiring duplicate resources, inefficient work sharing, and it's mostly done as a political maneuver to spread out the tax dollars so that the states can have people employed and have money coming in. If you think about it, America's space agency prioritizes its structure based on profit sharing and not getting to space. SpaceX combats these inefficiencies by heavily investing in vertical integration. Just like Tesla, SpaceX manufactures and designs over 80% of their rockets, engines, electronics, motherboards, sensors, and more, all under one roof in California. This way they maintain ownership and control over most of the supply chain, and also means that they're very quick to adapt when something is fucking up. One example of this is the astronaut flight harness. A NASA one costs $10,000. You can buy a racing harness that does the same thing, meets the same safety requirements for $500 off the shelf. The other reason spaceflight is so extremely expensive is because of what Elon Musk likes to call plane theory. Imagine if you need a new plane at $90 million every single time you take a flight. We wouldn't be flying a lot. Very few people would fly, and air travel would never have taken off, pun intended. Instead, we can reuse our planes and go from a $500,000 price tag to a $43 ticket price. The cost of the propellant on the Falcon 9 is only about 0.3% of the total price. So if the vehicle costs $60 million, the propellant costs $200,000. So the other way that SpaceX can drastically reduce prices is with a reusable rocket. A lot of people get confused by this because we already had a reusable rocket that was the space shuttle, right? So I wanted to go into the space shuttle a bit. The space shuttle wasn't really reusable. The only part of the space shuttle that was reusable was the actual shuttle. The main boosters and the side tanks were pretty much always thrown away. The side tanks were actually recovered and designed to be reusable, but it costs more to recover one and refurbish one than it did to just build a brand new one. The space shuttle itself required extensive refurbishment, taking between 50 and 80 days at a minimum, and those are the records, by the way. The space shuttle program also cost $196 billion over a 30-year life of the project, and the average cost to launch was $1.6 billion. So it wasn't really reusable, it wasn't really affordable, and it wasn't very fast. So we've talked about the big picture and the problems that we need to solve them, but this is the situation we're in currently. Before SpaceX came to be, we have, when we're looking at Mars, we have the people that want to go to Mars, people want to send a mission to Mars, and then we have people that can afford to go to Mars. And this is a Venn diagram, which you can't really tell because the circles are very far apart. If we expand out our current technology before SpaceX, using what we've currently got, using the SLS systems, we get a little bit closer. We get $10 billion per person, which is sort of the thing that you can do once and say you've done it, like we did with the moon, but not anything you can do any further than that. So SpaceX needed to come up with a way to reduce not just the cost of spaceflight, but also the cost of the trip to Mars. Everything done at SpaceX is focused on their ultimate goal, to make Mars affordable and achievable. So they're actually aiming for a price of $500,000, which is still quite expensive, but considering the price of the space program, it's something that is a lot more achievable. And the idea is that if you want to move to Mars and colonize Mars, then you can sell your house because you don't need a house on Earth if you're going to Mars. When I originally decided to give this talk, I was going to spend my entire time talking about this timeline, which is a pretty damn impressive timeline. Unfortunately, with only 20 minutes, my decision to go on to a bit more about the why and the when, we'll have to stick to some highlights, which will feel a bit anticlimactic given the achievements that we're talking about. So I apologize for that in advance. In SpaceX, in 2006, SpaceX's first rocket blew up. LOS means loss of ship. And they tried again and again. Rockets are complicated in the space business, and the learning curve is very steep. In 2008, SpaceX's third attempt blew up. They'd only ever budgeted for 3 missions, and continuing on meant more funding, which they didn't have. Elon Musk worked out that he had just enough money for one more launch, one more shot at the space. So he self-funded one last all-or-nothing attempt, and it worked. SpaceX became the 8th country or organisation to obtain orbital capabilities. And as a side note, New Zealand became the 11th organisation or country in last week on the 21st of January, thanks to Rocket Lab. So it's a pretty short list of people and places that have managed to put anything into space. So it's pretty cool that we're on there now as well. In 2015, SpaceX made history with the first successful landing of a rocket ever. And then in 2017, they did what was considered impossible, and they reused a landed rocket without extensive refurbishment or basically what Space Shuttle was, which was completely rebuilt from inside out. So from 2017, Earth has a reusable rocket program. So I've talked about SpaceX, is this need to completely change the way we make rockets, and now the need for reusability. So let's look at some real world applications of that, and that means dollars. And this is really complicated, so bear with me. I tried to really distill it down. The United Launch Alliance has a complete monopoly on US launch market before SpaceX. They're paid approximate $422 million per launch. This figure is actually really complicated and controversial, but the simple version is that contracts mean that the USA has to pay the ULA a set amount regardless of flights. It's their keep the lights on fee that adds on to these direct launch costs that they like to quote. Believing the official reports from the ULA would mean they charge $220 million per launch, and for a military launch, SpaceX would charge $90 million, just because there's more sort of setup involved. For a commercial cargo, it's $61 million, and now we have reusability. They estimate that about 30% cost reduction will bring that down to $43 million. That means that if the private companies could send that means that private companies could send almost 10 times more volume to space if the SpaceX had ULA's budget. And that's the sort of breakthrough we need for Mars, and that's probably the sort of thing we're going to see moving forward as organisations like ULA and others find it more and more difficult to compete with SpaceX's pricing. So we've cut out costs by an order of magnitude, and we've got reusability. Where do we go from here? This is the BFR. Yes, it does stand what you think. It does stand for what you think, and the R is rocket. So the BFR is basically how SpaceX sees the mission architecture for getting to Mars. It's a completely reusable rocket launch on a completely reusable booster. It's refueled with another BFR in orbit around Earth before making the 3-month trip to Mars. Once there, it lands propulsively on planet. We can construct a refueling station using resources found on Mars. And then we can lift off from Mars, come back to Earth, and land propulsively on Earth. The BFR will be capable of 12 return to flights to Mars for each rocket. And Elon Musk wants to build a lot of these. But the funding is another issue and probably another topic, but there's some really cool stuff that's come out about that. So this thing is kind of huge. It's larger than the rocket that took us to the moon. And because it's completely reusable, it's also the cheapest rocket we've ever built. So this is the BFR down here compared to Falcon 1, Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy. And then all the way down here we've got the Saturn V, which is what took us to the moon. This is the breakthrough we need to access the space age. So these are the current timelines for the missions to Mars, and they're kind of crazy close. These dates will probably slip, but I'm confident that within 2030 we will have humans living on Mars. The thing about Elon Musk is that he aims high. He sets goals that he knows might not be achievable. He sets goals that he thinks that if everything works perfectly and if everyone works 24/7, they'll be achievable. So sometimes it does take longer than planned, but the thing about goal setting this way is that if you only ever aim for what you know to be possible, you'll never know how far you can push yourself. And he's done that with every single company he's worked in. And he gets a lot of flack for constantly failing his deadlines, but he then achieves things that people always said were impossible. I think I've got a bit more time, so there's 2 other things I was going to say. So this is a video of the Falcon Heavy Static Fire from this Wednesday, when after 5 years of waiting, the Falcon Heavy finally fired its engines for the first time. The Falcon Heavy is basically what a 9-year-old would build a more powerful rocket. What if we took 3 rockets and strapped them together? It was supposed to launch in 2013, but there's been a few different delays. But when it does launch, Falcon Heavy will be the most powerful rocket ever launched from Earth, and SpaceX is planning to try and land every 3 one of its boosters. We're expecting that launch to take place in the next few weeks, and I think we actually finally got a date. It's February the 4th, so definitely have a look out for that. It's going to be pretty amazing. Elon has warned there are going to be fireworks of the expensive kind, but regardless of the success of the mission, it makes a significant development of the SpaceX capabilities. The 5-year delay was caused by refinements in the Falcon 9. Basically, the Falcon 9 has gone through a whole bunch of evolutions. And every new version of the Falcon 9 has meant that the Falcon Heavy has had to be delayed because you can't sort of, fix your kitchen while you're still figuring out where to put your kitchen sink. And the Falcon Heavy is definitely the kitchen sink of the SpaceX fleet because it can pretty much carry anything that we've ever carried in space before. So I've got some stats here for you. The first version of the Falcon 9 could lift 900 kgs to orbit. The current version can carry 22 kgs. Sorry. The space shuttle could carry 24,000, and the current version of the Falcon Heavy can carry 63,000, so triple what the space shuttle could do. So this is all going well, assuming there's no explosions. So we'll have the 2 secondary boosters landing simultaneously first, and then we'll have the 3rd booster landing on a drone ship out in the sea. And also the cargo for this mission, because it's just a test flight, they didn't want to put a real satellite in there. So it's actually Elon's first Roadster, Tesla Roadster. So he's just sending his car to space. Because that's the sort of thing you can do when you're a CEO of a car company and a rocket company. Well, I feel like sometime far in the future, someone's going to go and grab it and be like, look at this car, it's spent 100 years in space, and then now we can use it. So they laughed when Elon Musk said he was going to build a rocket company. Neil Armstrong himself testified that funding SpaceX was a pledge to mediocrity. Neil deGrasse Tyson criticised Elon's involvement and said that private enterprise will never lead the space frontier. Before SpaceX destroyed their business, both Boeing and Lockheed were quick to dismiss Elon Musk's vision, saying that SpaceX had been unable to demonstrate they were even a competitor. At the end of the day, any idea which rocks the boat and forces people to think of new things will have fierce resistance. In 1962, the Beatles were rejected for having shit sound. In 1907, the British Minister of War said that the aeroplane would never fly. In 1825, they believed that going faster than 48 kilometers per hour would cause a woman's uterus to fly out from her body between the legs from the force of acceleration. For me, I believe that Elon Musk will achieve his plans, and that I believe that we will send people to Mars in this decade. For as long as some of us have dreamed, others have clung to what they know and rejected what they didn't. And it's up to each of us to follow our dreams, to reach for what may not be possible in hopes that it is. So that's the message. Thank you.